Welcome. Franz Kafka's The Trial. These are the topics that we shall discuss. Introduction to Franz Kafka, plot overview of the trial, critical discussions, setting, power, law, and order, and the trial as an absurd fiction. Franz Kafka, 1883 to 1924, was born in Prague, Austria-Hungary, now which is in Czech Republic, in a Jewish family. He had multiple affairs and failures. Felice Bauer, Malena Polak. In 1923, Kafka went to Berlin to devote himself to writing. During a vacation on the Baltic coast later that year, he met Dora Diamond, a young Jewish socialist. The couple lived in Berlin until Kafka's health significantly worsened during the spring of 1924. After a brief final stay in Prague, where Diamond joined them, he died of tuberculosis in a clinic near Vienna. Publications. Very few works were published, in fact, in his lifetime. He asked his friend Max Brod to burn his manuscripts after his death, but Brod instead published those. Kafka's works: The Metamorphosis, The Trial, The Judgment, The Castle, Contemplation, A Hunger Artist, Letters to Felice. Kafkaesque. Now, Kafkaesque, this phrase would mean having a nightmarishly complex, bizarre, or illogical quality. The word Kafkaesque is often applied to bizarre and impersonal administrative situations where individual feels powerless to understand or control what is happening. Now, Kafka's literature would refer to surreal fiction vividly expressed the anxiety, alienation, and the powerlessness of the individual in the 20th century. Now, this nightmarish setting is a quite common aspect in Kafka's literature, in which characters are crushed by nonsensical blind authority. The Metamorphosis, the first line, is very impactful. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into an enormous insect. So the element of shock is very much perceptible in the very first line of the Metamorphosis, and the element of absurdity also. The trial. Premise: an ambition-only young bank official named Joseph K. is arrested by two warders one fine morning, although he has done nothing wrong. K is indignant and outraged. The morning happens to be his 30th birthday. 1 year later, on the morning of his 31st birthday, two warders come again. For K, they take him to a quarry outside the town and kill him in the name of the law, and K simply lets them to do this. Themes: absurdity, surrealism, alienation. Absurdity. Absurdity would refer to the inherent meaninglessness of the world and man's constant effort to find meaning. Now, the element of absurdity, or the point of absurdity, is determined by the fact that man is constantly trying to find meaning in an apparently meaningless world. Surrealism, the evocative juxtaposition of incongruous images in order to include unconscious and dream elements. So, surrealism is basically a juxtaposition of unconscious, dreamy elements and consciousness. Alienation, law and order and powerlessness of an individual in the modern world. Critical discussions: setting, law and order versus its subjects, absurdity. Now it is to specify that All the screenshots that you would find in the next few slides are taken from Orson Welles' 1962 adaptation of the trial. Setting of the trial, Kafka's setting. Usually, Kafka's setting is what we find in the novel of Franz Kafka. I told you already, Kafka's would refer to uh, this phrase would mean having a nightmarishly complex, bizarre, or illogical quality. Kafka's is often applied to bizarre and impersonal administrative situations where the individual feels powerless to understand or control what is happening. Now, Kafka's literature would uh, express surreal and alienating qualities, nightmarish settings. Now, this is what we find in the trial. The setting of trial is stuffy and gloomy. The city is oppressively surrounded by the perplexing buildings. Kay is struck and cannot escape. In chapter 3, Kay finds himself in the dark, gloomy courtroom attic where the otherwise healthy Kay begins to feel ill as he realizes he is in a virtual prison. There was no direct source of light. Instead of solid walls, it had just wooden bars reaching up to the ceiling. In chapter 1, we see that Kay's bedroom has two doors, one adjoining Mrs. Grubach's living room, the other Miss Bursner's bedroom. So, as if Kay's position is that of an entrapped one. In chapter 1, we also find that the exactly opposite apartment of K, there is one peeping old man and woman uh, who would always look at Kafka's movements, sorry, K's movements. Now, so that is quite obvious that K is surrounded. The feeling is that of a panopticon, but Foucault said that always someone is being observed. Chapter 2, we find a phone call informs K that a brief inquiry is on Sunday. He is given address. He's given address where he is to go, but not the time. K sets out on Sunday morning on foot. He chooses a stairway and ascends and look into from room to room, asking for lamps to avoid mentioning courtroom. On the fifth floor, a woman washing children's clothes tells him to enter and go through another door. Examining magistrates rebukes him for being over an hour late, although he was not given the time. When Kay replies that he is here now, the half of the crowd blasts into applause. The other half of the crowd remains stonily silent. He sets out to win over the entire audience. Now, in courtrooms, also we find that this courtroom is virtually a prison. It's oppressive, it's stuffy, it's one would feel claustrophobia in this courtroom. In chapter 3, we find that K, another man, would climb the stairs and enter a long, narrow lobby where various accused men wait. So it's a very absurd scene where various men are waiting almost for eternity for their time to come. In chapter 7, we find that one morning in his office, K, for no particular reason, just to avoid returning to his deck for a while, he opened the window. It was difficult to open as he had to turn the handle with both his hands. Then, through the whole height and breadth of the window, the mixture of the fog and smoke was drawn into the room and filling it with a straight smell of burning. So, even if you open the door, even Kay opened the door and window, smoke came into the room. So, the sense of claustrophobia pervades throughout this novel. At Titorelli's place, when temperature soars, Kay asks, could we not open the window? But the artist tells them it's only fixed plate of glass. It can be opened. Kay is incapable of concentrating on his work. The manufacturer knows a lowly painter called Titorelli. This is how Titterelli is being introduced in the novel, who paints a portrait for the court. So he might suggest something. This painter informed him of K's case. The painter lives in a section of the city even poorer than one K visited of his interrogation. K finds the building, climbs stairs, runs a gauntlet of nosy teenage girls, and meets the painter in the latter's tiny studio room. The, uh, the girls remain outside the door, peeping and listening. So constantly being watched, there is a sense of constantly being watched, sense of panopticon, and sense of claustrophobia is always there. It's a sort of nightmare where K is being trapped. The nosy girls are still outside the door. The painter lets K out through the another door in tiny room. This leads to a hallway, looks identical to the lobby of the law offices. When K is trying to avoid the nosy girls who peep into K's activities, then K just runs through a narrow alley. The painter informs K that there are law court offices in nearly every attic. So law is everywhere. So the sense is that a man is trapped under the court, under the law legal system, and the sense is that of a claustrophobia, as if someone is trapped in a nightmare. Absurdity. The elements of absurdity are obviously there. Existentialism, absurdity is connected to existentialism. The term existentialism was coined by French Catholic philosopher Gabriel Marcel in the mid 1940s. Marcel applied the term to Jean Paul Sartre as a colloquium in 1945. Sartre rejected it though. Sartre subsequently changed his mind and on October 29, 1945, publicly adopted existentialist label in a lecture to the Club Maintenant in Paris. The lecture was published as Existentialism is a Humanism. Existence precedes essence. Jean-Paul Sartre, in 1945 lecture, Existentialism is a Humanism, uh, uttered this phrase. Now, if you try to analyze what does this existence would mean, here existence is referred to individuals. Um, that individuals is that they are individuals, independently acting and responsible conscious beings. So existence here would mean that individuals are responsible for their own acts. Essence, what labels, roles, stereotypes, definitions, or other preconceived categories the individuals fit, or rather how the other would define you. So basically, if we try to decode the meaning, human beings through their own consciousness create their own values and determine a meaning to their life. Absurd. Absurdism denies the traditional Abrahamic religion's perspective, which establishes life's purpose is about fulfillment of God's commandments. Absurdism first denies the uh, proclamation of the Abrahamic religion that would say man is to fulfill a destiny which is determined by the God. Now, absurdism would claim that the world is actually meaningless. It would become meaningful only when we attribute meaning to it. We put meaning to the world, so that's why the world would become meaningful. There is no meaning in the world beyond what meaning we gave it. Absurd is generated at the point when one individual realizes that he or she attempts to find meaning in an utterly meaningless world. So, absurdism, the sense of absurdism is uh, born at the moment when someone realizes that he or she is trying to find meaning constantly in an utterly meaningless world. The absurd. The absurd refers to the conflict between the human tendency to seek inherent value and meaning in life and the human inability to find these with any certainty. As I told you already, that this point where one tries to find meaning in the world but realizes that the world is actually meaningless. This absurdism is often related to the myth of Sisyphus. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus elucidates the concept of the absurd. The absurd comes with the realization that the world is not rational. At this point of his effort, man stands face to face with the irrational. Man realizes that whatever he strives to do, that is utterly meaningless, because the world is basically meaningless. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. The absurd is born at the moment when one realizes that he is trying to find meaning in the meaningless world. The myth of Sisyphus is that Sisyphus is a mythical character who would roll up a gigantic stone up to the cliff, only it would it would fall once again. So the task is somehow it's repetitive. The mythical character Sisyphus would roll up the stone and it would roll back to the ground. So this repetitive work, this irrational task would reflect the irrationality of human that who would try to find meaning in the meaningless world. Solution of the absurd dilemma: suicide or escaping existence? No. Absurdists claimed that suicide is not, or escaping existence is not the solution of this absurdity of the world. Rather, the leap of faith is something that religious, spiritual, abstract belief in a transcendent realm, being, or idea. Some way we always imbibe this, that we always take the leap of faith that there is meaning in the world, there is some higher celestial order that is operating the world, but which is actually not. So what Camus is suggesting is to commit philosophical suicide. Now, what is philosophical suicide? Stop being irrational, stop desiring much, stop seeking something that is not absolutely necessary, stop putting meaning to the world. At this moment, this absurdity, the crisis created by the absurdity would cease. So it can be defined in another way: accepting the absurd. To realize the world is absolutely meaningless, we try to put meaning to it. The world would become meaningful only when we put meaning to it. So accepting the absurd is an ultimate solution to this crisis generated by this absurdity of the world. Now, absolute literature focuses on the experiences of the characters in situations where they cannot find any inherent purpose in life. Meaninglessness is represented by ultimately meaningless actions, even that call into question the certainty of existential concepts such as truth or value. Common elements in absolute literature: satire, dark humor, incongruity, the abasement of reason. Absolute literature. There are a few famous examples of absolute literature: Kafka's Metamorphosis, Kafka's The Trial, Albert Camus' The Stranger, plays Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, Eugene Ionesco's Rhinoceros, and The Bald Soprano, Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, Harold Pinter's The Birthday Party, Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Absurd elements in the trial, meaningless, irrational events. If you read the trial, you'd find that it's like K is trapped in a nightmare where irrational things are happening. Two people came suddenly to arrest K without any proper reason. K was asked to attend the court, but this court was very difficult to find, and he was not given a time. And when he found the court within a mysterious room in a building, the court was full of people who are very awkward. If you read the novel, you would realize that K is constantly being watched, so as if he is trapped in a nightmare. Though apparently meaningless irrational events are there in the trial, these meaningless irrational events would reflect the absurdity of human existence or the absurdity of the world. K's attempt to rationalize and find meaning, but K's the human strive of finding meaning in the meaningless world is presented through K's attempt to rationalize irrational events that are happening with him. Now, K's quest for order, the human strive for finding meaning, reason, is uh, presented through K's quest for order. Once again, the setting is stuffy, puzzling, as if K is entrapped. Surreal quality is definitely there because you see that you would find that uh, the entire novel is like a nightmare, a mixture of conscious and unconscious, as if he's trapped in a nightmare. So it's very difficult to perceive what is happening, like a nightmare. Even the premise of the trial would reflect absurdity, irrationality, because one morning Kay would find that two men are there to arrest him without any proper reason. And the absurd, you find that unreasonable, illogical, or inappropriate events. Somewhat it becomes ridiculous because um, K finds that two policemen are there to arrest him. 1 year later, on the morning of his 31st birthday, two herders again would come for K and they would kill him, and K would simply let them because he is under the law. In chapter 1, the men are here to arrest K. That is absurd. The way K found the courtroom within a room of an apartment, with an apartment which is not specified as a courtroom. So that is quite absurd. The way the magistrate would deal the case without dealing with the actual uh, actual accusement that is against K, it is quite absurd. In chapter 5, uh, when K is ready to leave the bank for the day, he hears convulsive sighs coming from the back of the door in a lumber room. When he opened the door, he found that the two warders were being whipped. Now, why they are whipped? Because K some way accused against them in the court. Now, no one is beyond the grasp of the court. That is what is signified here, and everyone is under surveillance. The way K found this Titorelli's room and the nosy girls peeping into the room, this scene is absolutely absurd. In chapter 9, when K was waiting for one Italian client, one priest came and told K that K was deluded and described an allegory that was supposed to be illustrative of his delusion. Now, the allegory is called the parable of the law. This tale tells of a man from the country who tries to gain admittance at an entrance to the law and is always denied by the doorkeeper, yet learns as he dies that the entrance was meant only for him. Now, it's absurd once again, and this delusion is quite relatable to K's condition because this parable would say that one man from country would come to the court to the door of law, and the doorkeeper would never let him in. But at the moment when he is about to die, he is told that this door is only meant for him. So this inherent absurdity in this parable of law is reflecting the situation of K, because law is something that is all powerful. Law wants K to be arrested, law wants K to be prosecuted, and that's why K is prosecuted. K is being prosecuted. There needs no reason for law to prosecute someone. Law is somewhat like a omnipotent, a very powerful entity. It does not need any reason actually to prosecute a person, and that is what is happening with K. In chapter 10, on 31st birthday of K, the warders came and took K outside the city to punish. K makes a final gesture, raising a hand and extending his fingers towards the figure in the window. Someone is just looking at K. One warder holds K while the other stabs him in the heart. He sees them watching him and makes a dying exclamation like a dog. When rationality is some way uh, dissociated from human, when the strife of finding meaning constantly in the apparently meaningless world would cease, our condition would become like that of an animal. Law Adder and its subjects. Kafka's oven, obviously, the setting is nightmarish, and as if K is in a nightmare where he is being prosecuted without knowing the reason why he has been prosecuted. Now, the setting of this novel is that of a panopticon. The panopticon is a type of institutional building and the system of control designed by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham. Now, you can see the picture where in the middle there would be one supervisor who can see all the prisoners from that position, from this vantage point. Now, Foucault used panopticon in Discipline and Punish to explore the relationship between systems of social control and people in a disciplinary situation, and the power knowledge concept, as if people are constantly being observed, constantly being monitored, constantly being observed, their activities are observed. And in the trial, you can find that from the very beginning that K is being observed. The two peeping men, two peeping, one peeping woman, one peeping old man, and K is constantly being followed by the by the authority, by the law. In chapter 1, the men are there to arrest Joseph K. K thinks that it's a prank played by his colleagues of the bank in his 30th birthday, but that is not. The law wants him to be arrested, and that's why he is being arrested. So when K asks that why I am being prosecuted, the two warders say that two warders say that we don't know. Our task is only to arrest you. In Albert Camus' The Stranger, The Outsider, which is alternatively named, you find the Marceau knows his crime and why he's summoned in the court. But instead of being prosecuted for killing a man, killing an Arab, he is being prosecuted. He has been punished for his lack of emotion. For his lack of emotion. So what is this novel? This trial is a sort of parable that would reflect, that would afford that law is something that all-powerful entity, and it would observe, and we are all under constant surveillance of law and authority, and this law does not need any necessary reason to prosecute anyone. It can do whatever it would like. So an individual is under the absolute authority of the law. It can do whatever it likes. Individual is powerless in front of the law. That is what we see in K. K constantly tries to rationalize the events without knowing that what is happening is actually irrational and there needs no reason for the law to prosecute him. That is one line is relevant here from King Lear, Act 4, Scene 1. As flies to the wanton boy, we are to the God. But here, as flies to the wanton boy, we are to the law. In chapter 2, K seizes the magistrate's notebook and holds up it with disdain. He gives a long speech describing his arrest. A disturbance among the audience is found. Then the magistrate, warns this K with these words, I merely wanted to point out that today you have flung away your own hand all advantages which an interrogation invariably confers on an innocent man. So the law is some way acknowledging that this K is innocent, but this law wants him to be punished. In chapter 3, we see that a series, we see an alley where various men are waiting for law for the time to come. Hmm? In that scene that I have already referred to, in a room inside the bank, which is very absurd, K finds that these two warders are being whipped because he just K said in the court that the misdemeanor uh, that he faced from these two warders. So that's why these two warders are being punished, and the whipper is only punishing them because it is the task of the whipper to do so. So no one is beyond the law. Everyone is under surveillance. In chapter 7, it is a very significant episode. Titorelli offers to use his connection to aid K's cause. Titorelli says that I can help you, and he describes the three possible accusers. Titorelli points out that there are only three options available for K to pursue. One is definite acquittal, which is very rare, and Titorelli has not seen one to gain this. Ostensible acquittal, to acknowledge the fact that anytime K can be just arrested, and the third one, which is suggested by Titorelli actually, which is indefinite postponement, just to defer the process of this process of trial, which would go on, and in the meantime K would continue to survive, which is also suggested by indirectly by K's lawyer. But K tries to find any absolute reason, any absolute solution. So that's why it becomes the reason of his own death. In chapter 8, Herhold, the lawyer of K, claims he would continue with his current activities, but K is not interested. Why? Because K sees that this Herhold is only delaying the process, which was actually suggested by Titorelli. But K wants solution. K wants absolute acquittal, and this is not going to happen. In chapter 9, once again, the parable of law is very important. Parable of law, it says that it's one man is waiting for the door, waiting in the door, but the doorkeeper never lets him in. When he is about to die, he learns that it is actually made for him. So law works in a very mysterious way, in its own way, and it can do whatever it would like. We are helpless in the face of law. On Joseph K's 31st birthday, two men in the coats and top hats come for him. Once on the journey, a policeman is on the verge of stopping them. They walk quickly past him, and K himself leads the trio in running out of the range of the officer. They walk out of the town in a deserted quarry situated near the urban-looking house, and K is killed. These are the references.